Come on, Okrin, you know I don't buy that anymore. If ever. Agent of Chaos still maintains that. Good. Finally. He's explaining some of these changes. Oh, she knows about that. Off screen, maybe? Oh. Look at this. I don't know, I don't like the term ability in this case. Reading Steiner, the all-seeing eye. Of course he's got a term for it. Immediately, just cooked up. Reading Steiner. The all-seeing eye, I mean, that's quite fitting. The all-seeing eye part. But yeah, those shots, you know, from behind the shelf, or from behind the items displayed on the shelf, you know, quite, you know, I like to call that the stalker shot. You know, sometimes you see it from behind bushes, just kind of creeping over the edge of an item. And it's quite fitting in this case, isn't it? Yeah. And of course, the reading Steiner didn't take place either, right? So maybe reel it back in for a bit, the D-mails. That can change from person to person, though. Does she truly believe that, though? Yeah, no. Do not let that happen. She has too much information. Oh. Yeah, she's good at that, right? Kind of disappearing in the background. It's the same shot again. Same angle. Oh yeah, that's right. Quite defensive there, Suzuha. I'll do you one better. Ooh. She got rather defensive, right? Oh my god. Okay, you've got to make sure to read it. Be there. You've got to hold her hand, essentially, throughout all of this. Ah, see? Just that reaction there. See, he's not... Oh. Ah, Ruka. Almost as if the universe stepped in, just at the right moment. Please don't let it go through. Even... Oh my god, it's going through, isn't it? Even in that pause there, she could have easily changed it. Whoa. .52. Fuck. It's insane to me that they just have Moeka, or Ocarina Moeka send one, given the information she has. Yeah. Someone's missing. Holy shit. IBN? Look for the IBN right away, man. The entire time that... Okay, I gotta calm down, man. I'm just getting so...
ルカ君？来てないけど。では、萌香はどうした？萌香さん？誰？
They never met her.
今日は来ていないのか？どうなんだ？それ誰？
Holy shit, man. This is...
私も聞いたことがない。
なんだと？
まさかまた D メールを？
それどういうこと？
Explain, Ocarina.
萌香という人間の存在そのものが消えた。着信履歴には7月31日までのメールが残っている。
Oh, okay. Some of those messages actually seem familiar.
どうかした。ごめん、今忙しくて後でメールするね。
The polar opposite of the Moika I know. And her aggressive approach about the...
メールを受け取ってからの桐生萌香さん、彼女の行動が変わり、ラボには来なかったというふうに過去が改変された。
Her aggressive approach about the IBN 5100. And now...
それに、今回もあんただけが覚えている、その、リーディングシュタイナー。
It happened.
世界線を超えて記憶を継続する力、本当に本物なの？
Fair enough. It's Ocarina, right? They know he can be quite over the top at times. This time they really slipped up, or Ocarina really slipped up. Oh, yes.
よくラボで寝泊まりできるわよね。
それがマッドサイエンティストなんだって。ダメだよ、オカリン。ルカ君は今日は
That's a great shot.
マユシーのお客さんなんだよ。マユシーのコスを着てくれるんだ
Oh.
ね。
I mean, Ruka made it clear that's not his thing a little bit earlier, but okay. Oh.
こんな格好恥ずかしい。大丈夫。
Cuteness is just...
これはローアングラー化したくなる。
Daru.
俺だ。今強烈な刺激を受けた。
Gather yourself, man.
心が侵食されて。
Okay.
変態女子よ。全身を寝め回すように見つめるのはよせ。
してないわよ。
The tables have turned.
けちからん展開。
He's just eating today, Daru.
待って。今日ここに来たのは。
Ah.
京馬さんたちにお願いがあったからなんです。コスを着に来てくれたんじゃなかったの？違うって言ってる。
Okay, so he didn't change his mind about it. Mayuri kind of just assumed, I suppose.
嬉しくてつい。で、頼みというのは？僕も過去にメールを送らせてほしいんです。
I thought she's going to ask for the IBN 5100 again, or maybe her...
ロト6を外してしまったお詫びをしようと。
Ah, the watermelon.
そしたら、まさかまた D メールを？それどういうこと？過去が変わり。女の子になりたいんです。は？僕、自分の容姿があんまり好きじゃなくて。
You don't like it?
少しは自信が出るかなって昔からそう思ってたんです。
一体彼女は何を言っているの？
ルカ子は女ではない男だ。お前も科学者なら自分の目でしっかり確かめてみる。
Observe? How so?
こんな可愛い子が男の子のはず。
Oh, that's... This is a bit of a tightrope here, you know? Maybe they're doing a bit... Okay, that's funny. But I felt like they're doing maybe a bit much, and then... Oh boy. Even if it somehow could. I mean... Yeah. Listen though, man. Yeah, he immediately kind of stepped up for that reason. Still no Suzaha. Ah, pager. My dad used to have one. Interesting that they have to explain it. I suppose I'm kind of aging myself. Almost 12. Even if Ruka's mom gets it, it's going to be so random. Like, she could... But just the just the message itself that can change things.
はい
本当に大丈夫かな
The butterfly effect. Doesn't even have to be specifically, the gender assignment aspect of it. There's like a heft and aggressive nature. Twice in one episode. Okay, let's look. 0.45. Yeah, last episode it was like 0.57. Holy shit, no.
リーディングシュタイナーが発動したということは
なるほど、こういう人もいるのね。
これは可愛いですルカちゃんにはこういうの絶対に合う
Ruka-chan instead of Ruka-kun.
そうかな
How
こら変態、どこを見つめている？
いやそうではなく
and Ruka covered up, but I mean that just could be
ルカ子は女になれたか
exactly. How do you
これは失敗だな
don't be too sure, but
変態じゃないよ変態紳士だよ
oh my god, that conversation
ほんとどうでもいい。
that happened
だが
in another context before, in another timeline.
どうした何かが変わったのだ何が
Something changed indeed. Listen, I'll talk about, the Ruka aspect of it. But, there's always going to be that idea of unforeseen consequences, unintended consequences. You can't pick and choose, right? Once you introduce something foreign, as in, this pager message, things could change dramatically just because a new message arrived. They're dabbling here, with exceptional forces and okay, so look at that. Once again, Okurin cuts quite a isolated figure, quite a confused figure, right? As things escalate. I've been going on and on about things escalating, but here, in this episode, twice he makes the jump twice, right? And again, I've got a name for it this time: the all-seeing eye, reading Steiner, right? So here, in this case, it's crucial because, and by this case I mean the conclusion, because he said, okay, he understands, right? He understands the mechanics of it at this point. It's happened enough to him to know, okay, the reading Steiner, all-seeing eye, took place, so that means I've jumped, right? And the divergence number, I believe, at this point is at 0.45, so it's going down, right? And in relation to that number, the last number that does flash on screen before they show me Okurin, kind of almost coming in or coming to his newfound reality, right? I mean, even the concept or the idea of his new reality is quite a fascinating one, right? Again, looking at it from Okurin's perspective, because on one hand, it's this incredible thing that he has, this condition, though, they like to call it an ability. So again, I'll call it an ability as well. I'm just saying, something about it doesn't feel like that it's, this positive, right? It's just kind of like a defect almost, kind of like an outlier, right? It's just a thing, Okurin seems to just be exempt, right, from all of this. As far as I know, he's the only one, right? As far as John Teeter knew, Okurin is the only one who's, showcased this exemption. Now, again, it's episode 8. I've got quite a bit ahead of me still. The idea of someone else also having this ability, the reading Steiner, the all-seeing eye, that could be interesting if that gets introduced at some point, right? Someone other than Okurin, right? And that could make things interesting, right? I mean, even now, you could kind of speculate about the existence of that, the existence of someone else that could have that ability. I think, if you give me a choice in terms of, okay, what's the most exciting or the most compelling additional individual that could have, the reading Steiner, the all-seeing eye. And at this point, I think the most fascinating or the most compelling could be someone, say, from the opposing side, right? And in this specific case, opposing side means CERN, right? And their idea of time travel and all of that, right? So if you have Okurin on this side over here, who's got this reading Steiner ability, right? The exemption, the ability to maintain his memories across timelines and world lines and all of that. Now, just naturally, I think of, okay, could someone from CERN also have that ability, right? But I don't know, realistically speaking, I'm not really expecting it. I think it's much more likely that Okurin, again, given that he is the protagonist, might be the only one who exhibits this really unique ability, behavior, defect, all of that, right? Condition. And yeah, because of that, it puts him in a really, fascinating, compelling, unique situation. At times you could say quite a sad situation as well, right? This idea of losing grasp of your own reality, your own existence. And, at this point, I think Okurin is slowly finding himself kind of stuck in a state of limbo, right? In the beginning stages of it, at least. And, episode by episode, it's going to escalate to the point that he's going to be just legitimately stuck. This internal tug of war, because, there's this savior aspect of it. And, that savior aspect is firmly attached to this future, this dystopian future, one that can kind of be bypassed by reaching the promised land of 1% or beyond 1% divergence. But, if you look at that, it's actually going in the opposite direction at the moment, right? Last episode, 0.57, right? This episode, 0.52 earlier in the first half of the episode, and now 0.45, right? So, I mean, ideally, that's not the direction our John Teeter, again, I'm doing air quotes, because at this point, it's becoming even more likely, even more concrete that, indeed, perhaps I was on the right track, and our John Teeter most likely is Suzuha. You see that really defensive reaction once Okurin tells Suzuha, I'm beginning to think maybe John Teeter isn't really right about some of these things, or some of these really specific things I asked of John Teeter. You see immediately, Suzuha just gets defensive. And, that right there is not something new. I've seen Suzuha kind of, maybe get a little too eager. She's quite excitable. She's a youngster. She's quite young still. She's a teenager. And, she's a teenager that finds herself in really quite a intense situation, a time traveler. Yes, this is not a normal teenager per se, given her experiences in this dystopian future and, the things that she's kind of described and the things that she slipped up on. And, because of those slip ups, it's been this drip feed of, okay, how exactly has this dystopian future shaped out? The day to day, right? The minute-to-minute existence in this dystopian future, be it death reports, be it airstrikes or air raids, be it this idea, this potential of being chipped and all of that, right? And then again, the whole concept of just not even really understanding corn, right? The actual original form of corn. And, you can go on and on about, Suzuha's slip-ups. But again, those slip-ups give us quite the picture, or they paint quite the picture. And now, you can essentially... I do essentially have quite a decent idea of, the dystopian future that she comes from, that John Teeter most likely comes from, right? I think this episode kind of almost connects those dots, So I think it's highly likely that, Suzuha is our John Teeter. And again, if you go back a couple of episodes in that alley, right, around the time she, kind of freaks out, thinks it's an air raid, but it's just a helicopter flying by, there at that point, it allowed me to kind of make that step, right, into, okay, now it's becoming a really concrete possibility that this is our John Teeter, right? After she, mentions that she knew someone who was essentially an IBN expert, but they died some time ago. And, at that point I said, again, based on the real life hoax and yet again, the details of that hoax, I, said, okay, she could be talking about her grandpa, right? So yeah, a few episodes later, now you have even more concrete evidence that she could be our John Teeter. But let's kind of go back to my initial point about Okurin finding himself in a state of limbo, right? In the beginning stages of it, this idea of, being asked or requested to become a savior. And that aspect is attached to the future, right? Again, it's quite the staggering request that's been made of him, right? And you see how Ocarine kind of tries to handle it. He does his best, but you see it's almost kind of like a default setting, isn't it? Like a factory reset. He goes back to that, super over the top idea of, no, I'm a mad scientist, a savior. No, not me. I thrive in that chaos, an agent of chaos and all of that. But then the other half of potentially being stuck in the state of limbo is this idea that he's slowly beginning to lose his grip on his present reality, right? His existence, because of, again, the idea of jumping from timeline to timeline. And, I kind of actually discussed this in the last episode, this idea of, beginning to lose his connection to some of these people around him, these people that mean quite a bit to him, people like Daru and people like Mayuri, especially, who already noticed, in the last episode, I pointed it out that she's already noticing that Ocarine is kind of becoming, different. She notices that he's almost becoming, a bit distant, even though he's kind of like right there, right? Something about Ocarine feels different to Mayuri, right? And this is something, that comes naturally to someone like Mayuri, given that she is a childhood friend, right? So to her, it's this immediate change, or rather she's immediately able to notice that change, right? That maybe some of the others cannot. Someone like Daru might not be able to pick up on that. So, this idea of this internal tug of war beginning now, and him being in the beginning stages of being stuck in limbo, it all comes down to, do I now focus on, the savior aspect of it, the future, right? Help guide the world beyond 1% divergence, right? Take us to that promised land, true freedom, right? Or do I focus on fixing this, right? And by fixing it, I mean, somehow, getting back to square one, somehow undoing these demons. And, just the idea of that is staggering, isn't it? How exactly do you even begin to approach that? I think I kind of touched up on in the last episode's analysis, but yeah, it's a complicated process, right? So yeah, I'm rather excited to see how Ocarine is going to handle this. It's not going to be easy, right? It's going to do a number on him, as it already is. And the really interesting thing here is that in this episode, twice now, they kind of depicted the whole, D-mail phenomenon as something a bit more dangerous, right? If you really kind of pay attention to the sound design, I pointed it out twice actually because it was so clear to me. There's a heft to it, right? There's a rumbling, and again, it's a great sound design. Just immediately it puts you on your back foot, right? It just made it seem even more dangerous, right? That you are dabbling in exceptional forces, right? Twice, it gave off that really distinct energy of, oh, okay, this is much more aggressive than before. But yeah, ultimately, it's a really interesting directing choice, isn't it? To showcase the whole process, the D-mail phenomenon, as something a bit more, unstable, a bit more scary. That was my initial, thoughts on it as I'm experiencing it, right? The heft, the aggressive nature of it. All of a sudden, the rumbling, the sound design. Yeah, I liked it. I keep going on about these escalating stakes. This kind of reiterates that. And, speaking of directing choices, this is exceptional stuff. It really is. And it kind of continues that trend of really fantastic directing choices. I mean, here, you truly kind of get to be in Ocarine's shoes, right? There's a lot happening, right? He's jumping twice within one episode, within the span of one episode. And by the end of it, by the time he does it a second time, he's not even sure about the changes anymore, right? Because he does know that something has changed, right? But again, like I said, you can't just pick and choose. So it could be a bunch of small things that changed, maybe a couple of big things that changed, right? But at this point, he believes that he doesn't even know, right? I mean, one, really massive change and, an exceedingly impossible change at that appears to have happened right in front of me and in front of Ocarine, right? But Ocarine has decided that no, it looks like it failed, right? And again, I am speaking of
Ruka, right? Now, that topic, um, I'll be honest, I think I need to kind of let it play out for a bit. I mean, yes, I'll give some of my thoughts on it. Um, but I kind of just need to let it play out to see their approach and just the direction it's heading into, because even though Okurin missed it, and again, understandably so, given the process he's just been through, the whole reading Steiner, all-seeing eye taking place, and him jumping into another timeline, or rather his consciousness jumping into another Okurin in another timeline, in a world line. Just that idea of it is kind of insane, isn't it? Because on one end, it's this incredible thing, right? The ability to be able to observe changes, right? He's the only one who's in a position to observe, right? Ruka, a lot of times throughout this episode, I'm trying to make a point, but then, of course, I stop because of the dialogue. At one point, I was trying to say, even if somehow happens, Ruka's never going to know, or that Ruka is never going to know, right? Because any potential change, and it appears to be quite a massive change in this one, it's going to take place in a different timeline, right? In a divergent timeline. There's some signs that indeed it took place. The intended change took place. Now at that point, once he comes to, Okurin that is, and essentially kind of has to catch up. He's always playing catch up in a new world line, right? Because he doesn't have those memories. He doesn't have the memories of the Okurin that just got taken over, that just got erased, right? Now, yes, a lot of the things remain similar, right? But they kind of play out just slightly different. For example, the watermelon. It was still about to happen, but, Ruka, again, turns up or shows up at that exact moment as Okurin actually jumped the first time, right? And, because of that, Ruka, decides to, just kind of go home and really kind of think about this possibility and option and opportunity, perhaps, right? So the watermelon doesn't come into the lab, into the living room, right, for them to enjoy, like they do clearly in the first part of that episode, right? Though it would have been nice if they asked Ruka to stick around. No, the thing is, to be fair, Makise did say, "Oh, you're leaving already," and Ruka, again, Ruka's really quite respectful and mindful, and essentially picked up on this idea of them being in the middle of something, right? Lab stuff. Maybe even beyond that, Ruka still didn't quite feel like it's his or her, place to, encroach that at this moment in time, at least. And see there, in hindsight now, it's rather deliberate, isn't it? There, Mayuri straight up asked, "You should come by sometime again and try on some of my costumes." And Ruka immediately said, "That's not my thing," right? And you see Mayuri gets a little bit sad. Oh, and I think the dialogue there is, "Oh, you don't really want to?" And then, Ruka just again, professional, and just keeps it nice and said his goodbyes and just left, right? Really, really respectful young person there. But that's a deliberate choice to showcase and establish that Ruka's not into all that dress up. Now, that being said, since day one, Ruka is presented as someone quite feminine. I mean, that was a whole introduction. I mean, it's a really comedic moment. Comedic because of Okurin's delivery, of course. Let me just reiterate that. I mean, there's quite a bit of comedy in this episode as well. I don't want to say at Ruka's expense, but I don't know if everyone found that funny. Some aspects of it are funny, of course, and other aspects of it, I thought, oh, okay, this is, walking a tightrope here, in terms of, Makise observing, as a scientist, and, walking up to Ruka and saying, oh, there's no chance a boy could be this cute, right? Something along those lines. And you see almost immediately the expression on Ruka's face, right? Just kind of looks down, looks kind of sad. And then, of course, Makise proceeds to grab Ruka's chest. That kind of floored me. I mean, again, there is comedic element attached to that. But again, not everyone's going to find it funny, So, see, this is something I kind of not need to tippy-toe around, but, kind of let it play out a bit to see their approach as a whole, right? Again, this is a story that is from the early 2000s, or not early 2000s, 2010s, the early 2010s, right? Now, yeah, the anime is from 2011, I believe. That's the official release. Yeah, that's the official release here. But again, there's that game, the visual novel, that is perhaps a couple years before that, maybe. But going back to this idea of Ruka being feminine, in Ruka's first appearance, listen, before I even knew Ruka's a guy, again, Ocarine is essentially telling himself, no matter how attractive you find Ruka, no matter how feminine Ruka is, he's still a dude, right? That was Okarine's approach to that. But there, before I knew any of that, I just assumed this is a girl, right? And I could see immediately that this person has a crush on Ocarine, Kiyoma and all of that. And even the outfit, the shrine maid outfit, right? And the hair, and it is feminine. It is all presented as quite feminine. So I just assumed and respected that this is how Ruka feels comfortable, right? But here in this episode, Ruka said, again, after making that request, I do want to send a message, I want to be a girl. Ruka said he doesn't like the way he looks. I've got the exact line of dialogue right here. I don't like the way I look. I always felt that I might feel more confident with myself if I were a girl, right? So I was kind of thrown for a loop there because, I just assumed, Ruka feels comfortable, right? Dressing in that manner. And I'm alluding to, again, the shrine maid outfit and just how Ruka looks, day to day. But even there's a bit of a fake out, because I thought, there has been a change, since Ocarine did jump into a different timeline. Ruka calls him Mayuri, right? And you see Mayuri is rather excited. And, the follow-up is Ruka being at the lab. And of course, Okarine's, asking about the sword and all of that, just, goofing around. And Mayuri, jumps in. She's like, no, calm down. Ruka's my guest. And, Ruka's here to try on some costumes. So, there I thought, oh, look at this. There's already a bit of a change here. Ruka is receptive to trying on costumes, is into all of that, right? Because, earlier, again, in the timeline before this one, before the jump, Ruka made it clear, right? Nah, that's not really my thing. But here, it made it seem like, oh, Ruka is into it. But then, later it turned out that Mayuri just didn't give Ruka a chance to explain and just kind of strong-armed, Ruka into the washroom or the changing room. And yeah, you get that scene. But then, of course, Ruka finally steps in, is able to step in and lets Mayuri know, okay, please stop for a second. Let me kind of speak. And then it becomes clear, okay, no, Ruka didn't change his mind. He's actually here for something else. And as you saw, my initial thought was, okay, maybe, Ruka's been asked, by his father to maybe bring back the IBN 5100. Something along those lines. I just thought that Ruka's about to ask for the IBN 5100, right? And maybe that might be a really clever approach to finally having Ocarine realize, oh, the IBN 5100, right? And maybe then the light bulb moment happens because, up until this point, Ocarine is just completely overlooking it, right? You saw me, I got rather heated, throughout that episode, or at least the first half of that episode, that idea of Moeka being allowed to send the D-mail, right? I'll get into all of that. But it's still kind of insane that, Ocarine didn't check for the IBM. The first thing he should have checked for is the IBM 5100. It's the one thing that Moeka has been after since day one, since the first time they met, right? Since the first time Moeka ran into Ocarine or found Ocarine, right? There's a bit of a difference there, isn't there? Given that she kind of knew, from the looks of it, she knew to look for Ocarine, and she took a photo of Ocarine specifically as well, right? So then that idea of potentially having intel on Ocarine comes into play as well, right? And then you bring in this third party, FB. But yeah, of course, more on Moeka in a bit, and that incredible slip up, right? Allowing her to send a D-mail. Episode by episode, I've been saying she's got too much information, far too much information. She's on the inside. She's taking photos. She's understanding, just the mechanics of the D-mail phenomenon. And by crucial information, She knew the location of the IBN 5100. As you remember, episodes ago, Ocarine carelessly or just casually dropped it. This is after she asked, "Oh, can I borrow it?" And, Ocarine told her, "No, I can't let you borrow it because I'm borrowing it myself from the original owner." And then he drops the location, the name of the original owner, right? He mentioned the specific shrine it came from, right? So yeah, she just had so much information. Yeah, I mean, listen, yeah, see, Suzuha also had that information, right? Because Ocarine tells her as well. This is the first time Suzuha sees Makise in person. There's that really aggressive and almost instinctive reaction to seeing Makise, right? She immediately kind of gets into combat mode, right? See, there, I didn't really feel any sense of danger or frustration that, okay, Suzuha now knows about the shrine and, the IBN 5100's location. Yeah, that's just been my understanding of Suzuha. She's always felt safe around Ocarine, right? Someone that is looking out for Ocarine, someone that does not mean harm to Ocarine. But, with Moeka, there's always been this sense of unease, right? Because there's just too many unknowns about Moeka. And there's something just off-putting about Moeka, right? You simply cannot trust Moeka, right? And then, of course, you've got this idea of the person that she speaks to and has a correspondence with, the FB person. It becomes even more scary then, right? So Moeka finding out about the shrine, that gave me concern, cause for concern. And now it seems to have played out to its natural conclusion. She was able to send a D-mail, and I firmly believe that she bamboozled Ocarine, right? She showed this message about, "Oh yeah, I just want to change my phone," right? But then you see, she has moments twice, right? First, there's a tight shot of her eyes as she's writing up the message, the final message, right? Typing it up. And, there's that reaction in her eyes. Just then, you just know something's up, right? To me, it just felt so immediate and natural to think that, okay, yeah, she's clearly bamboozling him, right? And then if she didn't change it then, she easily could have changed it. Because that's just my expectation of Moeka, that she is trying to bamboozle Ocarine, that she is trying to obtain the IBN 5100, the one thing she's been after. She's been aggressive in her approach about the IBN 5100, right? Incessant, persistent, to the point that she shows up at the lab right in the morning, again, bamboozles Ocarine at that point as well. I mean, since I'm already so deep, let's just kind of continue on Moeka, and then I'll return to the conclusion, the ending, the Ruka aspect of the story, and how Ocarine is going to handle all of this. Essentially, in this timeline, in this world line, Moeka never became a lab member, right? And you simply just go back and ask the question, why exactly did she become a lab member in the first place? Now, again, Ocarine reluctantly had to offer her a position of lab member because now, the cat was out of the bag. All of them, came in one by one and, kind of gave it up carelessly. All this talk of, the time machine and D-mails and all of that. So in that iteration, the reason she's over in the lab is to see the IBN 5100, right? Not just see it, she tries to actually borrow it then and there, right? Again, Ocarine kind of has to shut it down, and he slips up and he drops the name of the location, the original owner, the shrine. And then, of course, in the following episode, you see that she does kind of get to become a lab member. It's kind of wholesome at moments and then also concerning. And even then, she tries to swipe it, right? Tries to bamboozle Ocarine and just tries to walk out, right? And then because of that, Ocarine puts her in lab jail, right? And he gets eyes on her, tells Makise that it's her job. Ultimately, Mayuri kind of, helps calm everything down a bit, helps kind of calm Moeka down a bit, right? She doesn't like the idea that, okay, Moeka is being picked on and, being put into timeout and all of that. So she shows her around, reassures her, there's a really beautiful shot of Mayuri putting her hand on Moeka's hand. And you see, again, Moeka's eyes always tell a story, don't they? Right? Again, in this episode as well. So yeah, taking all of that into account, you look at Moeka's actions in this episode, right? Or the lack of them, essentially. Now it's a polar opposite. It's almost radio silence, right? And that is so jarring, isn't it? Because the fact that it's radio silence now means she's not pestering Ocarine about the IBN 5100, right? That's not a thing anymore. He has messages from her up until a certain point, July 31st, but nothing after that. Radio silence, right? Listen, I think it's right there. It's in front of us. She bamboozled Ocarine. She sent the location of the IBN 5100 in the D-mail, either to herself or this FB individual, right? And now, because of that, you see that she's got no need to be persistent, to be aggressive in her approach about the IBN 5100. That's how I'm looking at it. You know, this lack of persistence all of a sudden. Again, radio silence, polar opposite of the Moeka I know. I think in this timeline, she might have beaten Ocarine and Maxe to the IBN 5100 at the shrine, right? Or if not Moeka, maybe this FB person, right? Depends on who she actually ended up sending the D-mail to. Now, see, here's the thing. I can't really, even though to me, it just, yeah, you know, thinking out loud, speaking out loud, it just clicks, its sound, and its logic, right? Because that's my expectation of Moeka. She's always been after the IBN 5100. But the only thing is, Ocarine didn't even bring it up. Now, again, you know, in hindsight, to be fair, Ocarine is kind of going through it. You know, this, again, this concept of jumping to different timeline, taking over another Ocarine, right? And just feeling like you're in a daze and, you know, slowly coming to terms with your new surroundings, if you will. Even though, for the most part, things seem mostly the same. You know, let me kind of actually finish up a quick point I was trying to make a little bit earlier. You still see some of the same things playing out, just slightly different. Again, Ruka at the doorstep. He did bring the watermelon, but just didn't, you know, knock. Decides to kind of, you know, go back and think about the things that he overheard. And then, you know, another fun moment happens, the perverted gentleman conversation, right? Maxe and Daru. In the last episode, I heard that conversation, or all of us, essentially, including Ocarine and Suzuha. And, you know, at that point, Ocarine realizes just how loud or just how much all of their voices carry into the street. That's the exact same conversation that's taking place. Just slightly different. You know, in this one, Ocarine is actually inside of the lab and actually just around for that conversation. I mean, it's essentially a background conversation, but, you know, for us audience members, it's a really unique Easter egg, I suppose. So, you know, of course, fair enough, Ocarine has quite a bit on his mind at that point, right? This idea of just Moeka not existing, right? At first, it appears or to him it appeared, and again, at that point, I don't even know, right? Until, you know, it became clear that Moeka is still around, but just not messaging him nonstop anymore, right? Then it became clear, okay, I see. But yeah, you know, his mind is more so on this idea of, you know, accidentally, potentially erasing her existence altogether, right? In this timeline, at least. But yeah, in terms of the IBN 5100, you see that it's clever. It doesn't really focus on that at all, right? After Moeka sends that D-mail, right? They don't bring it up. There's no need to bring it up in any context. I mean, they flash to a few quick locations within the lab, but I believe the IBN is placed on the floor on the left side to, you know, Daru's desktop, right? Or I suppose the lab desktop computer, right? So I'm not sure if they actually panned to that. I don't think they did, right? You see a couple shots of the washroom or the bathroom. He looks outside the window. Yeah, I don't think they actually pointed into that corner, did they? But see, here's the thing, and I kind of might just be undoing all of my talking points here. If in this new iteration or this brand new timeline he's jumped into, though he's jumped again since then, actually, see, here's the thing. I've jumped twice, so now I have to think about the newest timeline. You know, I'm not even in the first half timeline anymore, right? Because he jumped twice, so it's kind of almost pointless to even think about the first timeline, you know, the one that doesn't have Moeka as a lab member anymore. And in that timeline, the rest of the members have not even met Moeka, right? Because she never became a member, never came to the lab, because clearly she had no reason to come to the lab anymore, right? It's clear. I mean, it's clear as day, you know? But since then, they've sent another D-mail, or they've allowed Ruka to send another D-mail. Now, you know, Ocarine, I thought it's a really nice touch. You know, he actually does it because he feels that, yeah, this might be something Ruka is struggling with. So, you know, he's actually being a really nice guy in that moment. He is. And I mean, all of them just kind of agree, there's this understanding that, okay, this is just, I don't know, there's no scientific ground for any of this. Maxe is so sure that, okay, nothing can come out of this. Might as well just let Ruka kind of go through with it. Maybe just the process of it all might make Ruka feel a little bit better, right? But again, the thing is, earlier, you see that Maxe does know about the world line, or the changes, or that, it's changed into a different one now. So I suppose Ocarine spoke about that off screen, I suppose, right? Because, there's no reaction out of either Daru or Ocarine. It's the way she spoke about it, it's just like, okay, this is just a basic understanding now. They know about this, right? The many worlds interpretation aspect of it, of time travel, that they do find themselves in or within. Though, of course, only Ocarine is getting to experience that, right? Or observe those changes. And, then, there's that idea of, some people not wanting to change the past, right? You have that really great scene, actually, of Maxe, right? It's Maxe and Ocarine at the playground, and, she believes that all of her experiences, 18 years of life, good or bad, are integral and crucial to the person that she is today, right? And that she wouldn't change anything. And, I kind of stepped in and I questioned if she truly means it, right? Given, her own issues, some of her issues, her relationship or lack of relationship with her father, and how things have played out there, and how, she's stated that, she doesn't want to go down the same path as her father and all of that. But again, this is the many worlds interpretation. Any potential change to the past is just going to shift. Again, if it is substantial enough to shift to a different timeline. And that is something that is an interesting topic, right? You see Daru and that idea of, sending Daru the positions of, Ferris's cards or her, board in the Ferris Cup, yet it didn't do anything, right? Again, that could be because even so, it just wasn't substantial enough. Maybe Ferris is just that good that even if Daru had a bit of a heads up, bit of a head start about the positioning, she in the field, in the moment, she was able to just kind of, still take them out, right? Still think of other strategies to overcome maybe, some of this information that Daru had about that specific matchup, right? At the end of the day, it wasn't enough. Nothing about that was enough to change to a different timeline. But going back to Makise and, this idea of the sum of all of these experiences, good and bad, make you the person that you are today, right? What's happened has happened. And because of that, you stand here today, the person that you are. Now, again, like I said, that could easily change from person to person. For someone, it could be a heartbeat decision to change the past, right? Easily. Some people would jump at that notion. And then there might be others that are similar to Makise. Again, if Makise is being 100% truthful about that, right? And again, given the mechanics, the time travel mechanics here, the many worlds interpretation, even if, a change isn't going to actually affect you specifically, right, in your own timeline, there's always going to be that knowledge that, a change you made or a email you sent could have actually altered another version of you and sent them down a totally different trajectory. So of course, let's see if, some of these characters are mindful of that as well. The things they might be putting into motion, the things that they might be putting through, or putting themselves or other versions of themselves, other iterations of themselves through because of, D-mail messages. But, now it's becoming clear to them, slowly, because Makise is still, again, I think it's fair for her to ask, are you being for real? Is this a real thing? This ability that you seem to have, the reading Steiner, the all-seeing eye. Like I said, it's fair enough. Ocarine is quite grand, right, in his claims and all of that, mad scientist and and so forth. So, this could easily just sound like yet another one of his delusions, right? Reading Steiner. But then, of course, at this point, Makise can kind of clock it, alongside Mayuri, seeing that there is something off about Ocarine, and this is right after Ocarine kind of comes to and jumps into a different Ocarine, takes over a different Ocarine. And then, of course, Ocarine spends the next minute or so just flabbergasted. And, in this one, it's him kind of essentially asking about Moeka, shining finger, right? And then Makise kind of puts it together. Oh, you sent another D-mail, didn't you? Or, they sent another D-mail, or they allowed another D-mail, right? And this is a result, right? Now, this next one becomes a little bit tricky, right? This whole idea of, Ruka asking to send this message to her mom, right? And even that aspect of it, it's just so random in nature, right? If Ruka actually is a girl at this point in time, right? And again, like I said, there are some signs of that, again, Mayuri calling her Ruka-chan, and now you see that Ruka is clearly quite receptive and open to the idea of costumes and costume design, actually really into it, right? Sitting on that couch, her and Mayuri, or him and Mayuri. I don't know for sure just yet, but yeah, I'm thinking, yeah, Ruka is a girl now. But, even there, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it doesn't feel like, you look at it from Okurin's perspective, it doesn't really truly feel like anything is different because Ruka has always been like that, right? And they kind of accepted it, but, I say it kind of because they've made it really quite clear that, Okurin always makes it a point to point out that no, he's a guy, but he's a guy. Even here, Daru brings up, the Yuri is developing, right? But then, of course, Okurin steps in, not quite, not technically, because Rukako is a guy, right? So he pointed that out. But, going back to my point about the pager message to Ruka's mom, and, this kind of applies to everything, as far as D-mails are concerned. Just because you're sending a D-mail back, be it to yourself, be it to someone else, doesn't mean that person is immediately just going to act on it. It's just going to feel and seem so random in nature, right? There's a high likelihood that many of them just kind of treat it as spam, right? Or don't even look at it or take notice of it until maybe it's, past the crucial moment, I suppose. I mean, essentially it's blind faith, isn't it? Right? Taking meaningful action based on the information provided in any specific D-mail, right? But even the idea of meaningful action is up for debate, isn't it? Right? It's all relative. And then you kind of start branching off into the whole idea of unintended changes, unintended consequences, unintended or unforeseen changes, right? I really focused on that in the last episode. It's not always going to be clear. And, from Okurin's perspective, right at the end of that episode, it's not clear. To him, it's not clear, the changes or, what the changes are in this timeline that he's just jumped into. But yeah, this idea of not being in a position to pick and choose, yeah, the butterfly effect. It's been a bit of a constant now, right? As things escalate episode by episode. And even within the episode, right? This episode, you've got Okurin jumping twice. And, I'm thinking at some point it's going to escalate even further than that. And then, Okurin is really going to be at a loss, just really finding himself in a totally foreign place at some point, right? Or feeling like he's so out of place, and how that could potentially affect, the Mayuris and the Makise and the Darus of that specific iteration, that timeline that he finds himself in. So it's not even that it has to be specifically that message that Ruka sent about, eating vegetables for a healthy baby, and that, resulting in a timeline in which Ruka is a girl, is a female. Like I said, right after the episode, it's just the idea, the notion of introducing a new message, a message that did not exist at that point in time, right? Just the introduction of that foreign message, that could just change the trajectory of things, and that could maybe, lead to a branching off timeline, essentially, right? The butterfly effect. And, this one is going really far back. But yeah, quickly going back to Makise, usually kind of getting input about, okay, so this is the D-mail that was sent out, and these are the changes that I'm experiencing now because of my reading Steiner, my all-seeing eye ability, right? So how exactly do you approach this topic? Is Makise going to be receptive? This Makise going to be receptive to the idea of that D-mail, this specific one, that Ruka, wanted to send this? Or is she going to think that, Okurin is just being just really goofy again, right? I mean, he gets shut down quite a bit, both by Makise and Mayuri, because again, from Okurin's perspective, it doesn't seem like he's doing anything perverted, right? Because he's trying to, see if there is a change, but they don't know this. They don't know that Okurin is looking for changes, right? But I mean, he is still looking, and you see that Ruka does cover up. And like I said, sure, even if Ruka is a guy right now, Ruka is just kind of built like that, right? Mentality wise, that he probably would get shy, right? So there's still that possibility, but I think I'm leaning towards this Ruka actually being a girl, biologically, as in since birth. And listen, I only say that, I only use the term biological female here because that's how the episode presented it. Ruka himself wanted to be born a girl, but again, all of that being said, as of this point, Okurin believes it failed, and he believes that Ruka is a guy, right? As he's reiterated on a few occasions, right, throughout the first 8 episodes now. So let's see. I think the next episode has some interesting possibilities. But this idea of the butterfly effect and chaos theory, and specifically here in this episode's title, chaos theory, homeostasis, right? Homeostasis is essentially meant to be a state of equilibrium, right? So it's quite interesting, the title itself, chaos theory, homeostasis, because just through that title, it's kind of introducing this idea of or this notion of stability as well, right? And I suppose this kind of brings in that concept, and this is something that I've always kind of seen in these types of time travel narratives, this idea of time itself, and the universe itself, right, playing a part as far as to maybe not allowing some things to happen, or maybe not allowing certain things to go far. And I think, just in the last episode, the lotto numbers, there I brought up the possibility of the universe perhaps stepping in and making sure that there isn't that much of a change, and that much of a change essentially being them winning the lotto. Or, the other possibility, the likely possibility I thought at the time is, okay, maybe Ruka is just, overthinking it, right? Because it is from Kiyoma, it is from Okurin, right? Who Ruka seems to have a crush on, or at least thinks really highly of, right? And then you see just how apologetic Ruka is. You see there's this shot, it's a beautiful shot again at the shrine. Like I said, the infamous shrine, for good and bad reasons, I suppose. You see that Ruka is still just kind of upset, just annoyed with himself, slipping up in that manner, right? And from Ruka's perspective, possibly letting Kiyoma down, possibly letting Okurin down. But again, in the last episode's messages, you see that Okurin just has that goofy smile on his face, right? He doesn't, he doesn't think anything of it, right? He just thinks, come on, it's all good. So yeah, this specific title, Chaos Theory, Homeostasis, quite the yin and yang approach, isn't it? Right? Quite the clash. But yeah, this is one of those episodes that really truly had me feeling like Cooper, right? McConaughey's character from Interstellar. Kind of like, no, Galan, don't let me go, Murph, right? I was getting frustrated and kind of heated on Okurin's behalf because I know, the potential cost of these slip-ups, him being careless, or, them being so liberal about the use of the D-mails at the moment. I get that heated and that frustrated, I suppose, because I care. I care about these characters quite a bit, man. I've really latched onto these characters. I'm really protective of all of them, right? But in this specific case, Okurin, because I don't want to see him suffer, but he is going to suffer. That's just a given. He's going to suffer quite a bit before, hopefully, he'll be in a position to bounce back. But I firmly believe he is going to hit rock bottom, right? And again, as an audience member, as someone who's attached to these characters and Okurin specifically, I'm defensive. I get defensive for him on his behalf, right? That's why maybe, even for me, it's a little bit out of character, isn't it, to get that heated? But I felt it. I just felt it. But I do kind of want to go back for a second to, that idea of not, wanting to change the past. That it seems unfair that, Makise is adamant that she accepted her past, or she does accept her past, right? Her 18 years, flaws and all, right? Failures and all. Now, isn't it interesting that she said that? Because you don't really associate that term or some of that terminology with the genius girl that is Makise. But listen, I think it's rather grounded and realistic and authentic that everyone's got their own struggles. And, they've made it clear that Makise does have her own struggles with certain things, right? Yes, she might be this prodigy, this genius, but in many ways, she's just a normal kid, just a normal young adult who's got normal issues and problems and all of that. And that she can fit in with people like Okarin and Daru and Mayuri. So yeah, at this point, people like Makise and again, Daru as well, they understand, right, this idea of D-Mills, even on the rooftop. She's going step by step about the Moeka situation, right? So I really like that approach. You can always kind of count on Makise to pick up on these things. And then, because of that, she can also kind of function as our audience surrogate, right? Asking some of these really crucial questions of Okarin, right? And again, that triggers a response for both Makise and us, the audience. Though us audience is there step by step with Okarin, right? So it's more so for, characters like Makise and Daru to really kind of get caught up or catch up rather. But see, here's the thing. So at this point, it's clear that Makise certainly understands the many worlds interpretation aspect of it. The world line changes and the timeline changes and all of that, and that sending D-Mills can do that, right? But still, I always go back to episode 1, right before the first reading Steiner takes place. The first time the all-seeing eye takes effect. He sees Makise Karisu stabbed, right? Her body bleeding out. He still has not brought that up, right? Now that they do have some substantial, groundwork, essentially, right? He still hasn't brought that up. That he's been in, or his original, I suppose. Or, again, that's kind of relative, isn't it? And it kind of depends, I kind of need to just let it play out and see how it is going to at some point circle back to that. I said it right then and there in the first episode. It's a time travel narrative. It is going to circle back. And, in time travel narratives, you always think about it in that manner. The beginning is the end is the beginning, all of that good stuff, all that juicy stuff. So yeah, how long before Okarin finally kind of, works up the courage, I suppose, to bring that up, right? It's not something easy to bring up. It just isn't. And I think it's authentic and it's realistic that Okarin is really kind of, leave that untouched, right? As long as he needs to, essentially, because it's not an easy topic to bring up. That, hey, listen, now that all of us kind of understand the mechanics of this and, this really unique thing that I'm experiencing, I actually saw you he didn't see her get stabbed. Let me fix that. He saw her dead body or her body bleeding out, right? And then again, that really strange transition happens, and it's almost as if there's time missing in the middle, and Okarin is just shown outside of the building, right? And again, Mayuri shows up and kind of snaps him out of it. Mayuri is not suspicious in that first episode, but it's clear that there's something going on with that Mayuri, right? I'm so sure of it. You look at her expressions, that little smile, the smirk on her face, as Okarin is almost kind of like tripping balls and just, trying to think about the things that are happening here. But yeah, sooner or later, I think that conversation is going to take place. Okarin is going to end up sharing that information. And yeah, man, just the idea, it seems like such a distant thing now, doesn't it? Just that timeline, the world line from the first half of episode 1, right? From my perspective, again, because that's, episode 1, Okarin's original timeline, right? Yeah, it's always something really interesting to keep in mind. It's always in the back of my mind. It's not something you can just forget about. But yeah, I think I'll sign off on that note. And yeah, as far as the Ruka storyline is concerned, I'm going to let it kind of play out. I need to just kind of get to the next episode. Before I go a bit further into that. I think I've covered and given my thoughts about it in this episode as well, or in this discussion portion as well. But, I just kind of need to see it play out a bit more in terms of their approach, right? And then, let's kind of reassess, or, let's kind of tackle it. But yeah, if you enjoyed that, consider dropping a like, consider dropping some comments, give me your thoughts. If you are interested in early access or timer-based full length, or full opacity, consider checking out the Patreon page. The links are in the description and the pinned comment, also links to social media. Right then, thank you so much for joining me, folks, and thank you for your time, because time is precious. It really is. And I do hope to see you again soon for the next one. Until then, take it easy.